The studio lights blazed down with a kind of intensity that makes even the calmest guest sweat. Cameras hummed, audience members shifted in their seats, and the familiar opening theme of The View faded into the background. On this day, however, the atmosphere carried a strange weight, an uneasy energy that would soon erupt into one of the most unforgettable confrontations daytime television had ever seen. Chuck Norris, the martial arts legend himself, settled into the guest chair with the quiet composure of a man who had faced down countless opponents, both on screen and off. His reputation for discipline and control preceded him, and in that moment he looked every bit the calm storm at the eye of a circus. He had agreed to this appearance to promote his new fitness program aimed at seniors, something he was passionate about, a program designed to keep people active, healthy, and strong well into their golden years. But sitting across from him was Behar, one of television's most controversial and combative hosts. Known for her sharp tongue, pointed questions, and unrelenting smirk, Joy had no intention of keeping this conversation on fitness. She had a different target in mind, and from the very first question, the temperature in the room began to rise. "So, Chuck," Joy began, leaning forward with that signature gleam in her eye, "you're here talking about fitness for older folks. But let's be honest. Isn't this just capitalizing on all those internet memes about you? You know the ones. Chuck Norris doesn't do push-ups, the earth goes down. That kind of silly stuff. Aren't you just cashing in on the joke?" The audience chuckled lightly, but Chuck's expression didn't change. His eyes narrowed ever so slightly, though his voice remained calm, steady, and unwavering. "Joy," he said evenly, "I've dedicated my life to helping people improve themselves through martial arts and fitness. If some humor helps spread that message, then I'm fine with it. But I take this work seriously. This program isn't about internet jokes. It's about helping real people live better lives." But Joy wasn't finished. Her smirk deepened, her tone sharpened. "Come on, Chuck. Don't you think it's a little ridiculous? A grown man in his 80s, still pretending to be some kind of superhero? When do you plan on hanging up the karate uniform and accepting reality?" A murmur rippled through the studio. The other hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sunny Hostin cleared her throat, trying to redirect. "Joy, maybe we should focus on Chuck's actual program." But Joy cut her off with a dismissive wave. No. I think our viewers deserve some honesty here." She turned back to Chuck, her voice dripping with mockery. "Let's face it. You made a career out of playing tough guys in movies that weren't exactly Oscar material. Walker, Texas Ranger was more of a punchline than serious drama. Don't you think you're too old to still be living in this fantasy world?" Chuck's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed measured. "Joy, I've spent more than 50 years teaching martial arts, helping kids build confidence, working with law enforcement, and serving my community. That's not fantasy. That's reality." "Oh, please," Joy scoffed, rolling her eyes theatrically as the audience shifted uncomfortably. "You punch some boards, kick some stuntmen, and meanwhile the rest of us live in the real world. You can't just roundhouse kick your way out of every problem." Whoopi Goldberg, ever the peacemaker, tried to intervene. "Joy, I think Chuck has done a lot of good work." "Whoopi, stay out of this," Joy snapped, not taking her eyes off Chuck. "I'm trying to have an honest conversation here." Then, her smirk returned, sharper than before. "Tell me, Chuck, when was the last time you actually helped solve a real problem? Not a staged demonstration, not a photo op, but a real difference in someone's life." The room held its breath. Chuck leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping an octave. "Last month, I worked with a young veteran suffering from PTSD. Through martial arts training, he found the discipline and confidence to overcome his struggles and get his life back on track. 3 weeks ago, I helped a single mother in Texas learn self-defense after she was attacked in a parking lot. Just yesterday, I spent 4 hours teaching kids in an inner-city program how to focus their energy in positive ways instead of turning to the streets." For a moment, the crowd seemed moved. But Joy waved her hand dismissively, cutting through his words like a blade. "Oh, spare me the saint routine. You're telling me teaching someone to throw a punch is going to cure PTSD? That's insulting to real therapists and medical professionals who actually understand mental health. Chuck's patience was visibly thinning now. His breathing was steady, but his eyes hardened. "I never said martial arts was a cure-all," he replied. "But discipline, physical fitness, and mental focus absolutely help people overcome challenges. Maybe if you spent less time tearing people down and more time building them up, you'd understand that." The audience gasped softly at the sharpness of his response. Joy's eyes flashed with anger. "Excuse me? I've been fighting for progressive causes and speaking truth to power for decades while you were playing dress-up in Hollywood. Don't lecture me about building people up when your entire career is based on glorifying violence." Chuck's voice grew firmer now. "My career is based on self-discipline, respect, and protecting others. Maybe that's something you should think about before you attack someone you've never actually taken the time to understand." Joy leaned back, her smirk returning as if she had just scored a point. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You're a relic from a bygone era, clinging to toxic masculinity, pretending that the world still needs men like you. We don't need more violence, Chuck. We need compassion and understanding." Chuck's reply was measured, but his tone carried a quiet fire. "Joy, I agree. We do need compassion and understanding. But we also need people willing to stand up for what's right and protect those who can't protect themselves. That's not toxic masculinity. That's basic human decency." The audience erupted in applause, but Joy cut them off with a mocking laugh. "Basic human decency? Like the decency you showed in all those movies where you solved everything with your fists? What kind of message does that send to young people, that violence is always the answer?" And with that, the stage was set. What had begun as a promotional interview was now spiraling into a heated debate, a clash not just of personalities, but of entire worldviews. Chuck's calm exterior was beginning to show cracks, and Joy was only pressing harder, determined to push him to the breaking point. The confrontation was only just beginning. The audience leaned forward in their seats, sensing the storm that was building. At first, it was subtle, just a flicker in Chuck Norris's eyes, the tightening of his jawline, the measured breaths he took as he tried to keep his composure. For most guests, this would have been the moment to ease the tension, to redirect, to steer the conversation towards safer ground. But this host wasn't known for playing it safe. He thrived on conflict, on pushing people past their limits, and tonight, he had locked onto a target who had never been known to back down from a fight. "Come on, Chuck," the host sneered, his tone dripping with condescension. "You don't really expect anyone to believe those old stories, do you? Half the things people say about you, breaking bones with a single kick, taking down entire gangs by yourself, those are just myths. Hollywood fluff. The truth is, you were never that tough." The words hung in the air like a lit match hovering above gasoline. The audience gasped, some covering their mouths in shock, others whispering to their neighbors, unable to believe what they had just heard. The cameraman zoomed in, desperate to capture every twitch of emotion that crossed the martial arts legend's face. Chuck leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. For decades, he had built his legacy not only on his fists but on his discipline, his calm, his ability to control a room without ever raising his voice. But there was something about this host, something so deliberately disrespectful, that it pierced through that ironclad patience. "Careful," Chuck said softly, his voice so low that the audience had to lean in to catch it. "You're stepping into dangerous territory." The host smirked, mistaking the warning for weakness. "Dangerous territory? Please. You're not in one of your cheesy action movies now. This is real life, and in real life, Chuck, legends don't hold up under scrutiny." The audience erupted into boos, some shouting for the host to stop, others chanting Chuck's name in solidarity. The tension was electric, every second more unbearable than the last. Security guards along the stage exchanged nervous glances, unsure if they should be preparing for what felt inevitable. And then it happened. Chuck slowly leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his piercing gaze locking onto the host. "You think I'm just a story? You think the things I've done are fiction?" His voice, calm but carrying the weight of thunder, silenced the entire studio. "I've broken bones because I had to. I've faced men twice my size and walked away. I've stared down people who wanted to end me, and I'm still here. So, let me make this clear. If you think you can sit there, in your cushioned chair, and call me a fraud, then you're braver, or dumber, than most men I've ever met. The host chuckled nervously, adjusting his tie. For the first time all evening, doubt flickered across his face. The audience, however, was on fire. They roared in approval, chanting Chuck's name louder and louder until it shook the studio walls. But the host wasn't finished. He couldn't stop. Ego wouldn't allow it. "Oh, please," he said, trying to mask his unease with arrogance. "That's a great speech, Chuck. Real inspiring. But let's be honest, you're an old man now. Your best days are behind you. And deep down, you know it." That was the breaking point. Chuck stood up. Slowly, deliberately. His movement alone drew the audience to their feet, as though pulled by an invisible force. He towered over the host, not just in physical presence, but in sheer intensity. The studio lights caught the sharp lines of his face, and for a moment, it felt like the world outside those walls had vanished. The host shrank back in his chair, but Chuck didn't touch him. He didn't need to. Instead, he leaned in, so close that the host could feel the heat of his breath. "You wanted real life?" Chuck whispered. "Well, here it is. In real life, respect is earned, not mocked. And you, my friend, have just earned yourself a lesson you'll never forget." The crowd exploded into chaos. Cheers, screams, applause. Some audience members stood on their chairs. Others clapped so hard their hands turned red. The host, sweating now, forced a laugh, but his eyes darted nervously toward the cameras, as if silently pleading for someone to cut to commercial. But the producers weren't about to end this. They knew they had television gold. This wasn't just an interview anymore. This was history in the making. And Chuck knew it too. He straightened his posture, his presence filling the entire stage. "I came here tonight," he said, addressing not the host but the audience, "to talk about my work, my journey, my life." But instead, I was insulted, mocked, disrespected. And I'm not here to take that quietly. So let me tell you all something. No matter how old I get, no matter how many years pass, the spirit of a fighter never dies. You can doubt it. You can laugh at it. But when the moment comes to stand up, to face what's in front of you, that's when you find out who's real and who's pretending. The crowd thundered in applause, their cheers echoing like an earthquake. The host sat frozen, his earlier bravado shattered, replaced with silence. He had poked the lion, and now he was realizing the cage door had never been locked. As the camera zoomed in on Chuck's face, there was no doubt left in anyone's mind. The legend wasn't just alive. He was proving, in front of millions, that he was still the man no one dared to cross. But little did anyone know, the night was far from over. What came next would take this confrontation from unforgettable to absolutely explosive. The studio lights seemed to flicker, or maybe it was just the tension radiating off the stage. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether to cheer, gasp, or hold their breath. Chuck Norris leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but unflinching, as if he had been in 1,000 showdowns just like this one. But this wasn't a movie set. There were no stunt doubles, no rehearsed lines. This was raw, live, and spiraling out of control. The host, still gripping the armrest, raised his voice, determined not to be overshadowed. He had built a career on controversy, on provoking guests until they cracked, and he wasn't about to let a martial arts legend make him look weak in front of millions. "Don't mistake silence for weakness," the host sneered, his words slicing through the thick air. The audience murmured, shifting uneasily, sensing that every second was pushing the tension further past the point of no return. Chuck's eyes narrowed, but his body remained still, his voice steady when he finally spoke. "Strength isn't about how loud you can shout or how far you can push someone. Real strength is about knowing when to stand your ground and when to walk away." His words weren't delivered with aggression, but they carried a weight that filled the entire studio. The host leaned forward, not backing down, his face a mix of frustration and something that looked a lot like fear. He tried to laugh it off, mocking Chuck with exaggerated gestures, turning to the audience as if inviting them to side with him. But instead of laughter, he was met with silence, the kind of silence that told him the crowd wasn't on his side anymore. And that silence only fueled his desperation. "Let's stop pretending," the host snapped, pointing directly at Chuck. "You've made a career out of being the unbeatable tough guy. But that's Hollywood, Chuck. Out here, you're just another man. And if I pushed you hard enough, you'd break, just like everyone else." The words hung in the air like a spark over gasoline. The audience gasped collectively, some even shaking their heads as if to warn him he'd gone too far. Chuck didn't move. He didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly leaned forward, folding his hands on the table in front of him, his voice dropping low enough that the entire room had to lean in to catch every syllable. "Do you really want to find out?" It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a challenge. It was something much deeper, something that reached past the bravado of live television and touched on the primal instinct everyone carries, the recognition of true danger. And in that moment, the host's confidence cracked. Just a flicker, barely noticeable, but enough for the audience to see. Enough to shift the entire energy of the room. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the close-up of a man who had made a career out of controlling the narrative, now suddenly realizing he wasn't in control anymore. And the viewers at home? They were glued to their screens, phones buzzing, social media exploding with clips and live reactions. Hashtags flew across the internet as people debated whether this was a stunt or the realest moment television had ever broadcast. And then, just when it seemed the host had been cornered, he lashed out again. Not physically, but with words sharp enough to wound. He brought up personal stories, moments from Chuck's past, trying to dig into scars that had no place being exposed under studio lights. The kind of things that weren't meant for ratings or entertainment, but for private reflection. The audience recoiled, audibly gasping. This wasn't just an interview anymore, it was an ambush. And the cameras caught every ounce of it. Chuck took a deep breath, his expression unreadable. The studio's energy teetered between chaos and collapse. The host smirked, thinking he had regained some ground, but what happened next turned the entire situation on its head. Chuck stood up. Slowly, deliberately. His presence seemed to double in size, towering over the set without saying a word. The host immediately pushed back in his chair, startled, as though for the first time realizing that pushing a man beyond his limits doesn't just create good television, it creates consequences. The audience erupted, some cheering, some screaming, everyone on their feet as security rushed in from the sidelines, unsure whether to intervene or to simply let the legend handle things his own way. Chuck didn't raise his fists. He didn't need to. He simply looked down at the host, his voice calm, steady, and final. "You wanted to break me on your show. But here's the truth, you're the one who's broken." And the world just saw it. The crowd roared, a sound that shook the studio walls. The host's face drained of color, his smirk gone, his authority shattered in front of millions. For once, he had no comeback, no clever retort, just silence. And that silence was louder than anything that had been said all night. The cameras kept rolling, capturing the unforgettable image of Chuck Norris standing tall, the host slumped in his chair, and an audience that would never forget the night daytime television turned into a battlefield. And for those watching at home, they weren't just witnessing television history. They were part of it. Clips spread like wildfire, headlines prepared themselves, and whispers began. Was this the end of the host's career? Or the beginning of something even darker? Because when you push a legend too far, you never know what comes next. The studio was a battlefield now, but not in the way anyone expected. The audience sat in stunned silence, their eyes darting between Chuck Norris and the host, unsure if they were witnessing the end of a talk show or the birth of a legend. Security personnel lingered nervously near the stage, ready to intervene but clearly reluctant to step between a martial arts icon and a man who seemed determined to push his luck. The cameras stayed rolling, because no producer in their right mind would cut away from what had become the most talked-about broadcast of the decade. The host leaned forward, his voice low but dripping with provocation. "Tell me, Chuck, What's the point of all your discipline, all your training, if you can't handle a few tough questions from a guy like me? His smirk widened, and the audience gasped, knowing full well he had just crossed a dangerous line. But Chuck didn't flinch. Instead, he fixed the host with a stare so steady and calm that it froze the air in the room. You could almost feel heart skipping beats. That silence, tense, unbroken, was louder than any outburst could ever be. Finally, Chuck spoke, his voice deep and measured. Discipline, he said, pausing for effect, isn't about throwing punches. It's about knowing when not to. The words cut through the tension like a blade, and for a split second, it looked like the host had been disarmed. But he wasn't finished yet. With a laugh that came off more nervous than confident, the host shot back. Sounds like an excuse to me. Maybe you've gotten soft. The audience gasped again, and this time, Chuck leaned forward, his presence filling the space between them like a storm cloud rolling in. And then it happened. Not a punch, not a kick, not a single physical move. Chuck simply stood up. The moment he rose from his chair, the energy in the studio shifted completely. The audience instinctively leaned back. Security took a step closer. The host froze, his smirk faltering for the first time. Chuck Norris towering over him was a sight no one could ignore. He didn't need to do anything more. His silence, his stance, his very presence was enough to send a message louder than any strike ever could. The host, clearly rattled, tried to salvage the moment. "Sit down, Chuck. Don't try to intimidate me." But his voice cracked on the word intimidate, betraying him to the millions watching at home. The cameras caught it all, the beads of sweat forming on his forehead, the way his eyes darted nervously toward the exits, and the faint tremble in his hands as he adjusted his note cards. Chuck finally spoke again, his tone calm but final. "You wanted a show. Now you've got one. But it's not about fighting. It's about respect." The audience erupted into cheers, the kind that shook the rafters and echoed through living rooms across the country. People were on their feet, applauding, some even chanting Chuck's name. The host sat frozen, realizing he had lost control of his own show, outmatched not by violence, but by the unshakable will of a man who didn't need to lift a finger to win. And in that moment, Chuck Norris didn't just walk out of a hostile interview, he walked into legend. As he made his way toward the edge of the stage, Chuck turned back for one final line. "Strength isn't measured by what you can do to others. It's measured by what you can stop yourself from doing." And with that, he exited, leaving the host sitting alone in the harsh glow of the studio lights, visibly shaken, his smirk completely gone. The audience gave Chuck a standing ovation that seemed to last forever, while the cameras zoomed in on the host's defeated expression. Outside the studio, news crews were already gathering. Social media was exploding. Clips of the moment spread like wildfire, trending worldwide within minutes. Everyone had an opinion, but one thing was clear. Chuck Norris had just turned a potential ambush into the most powerful demonstration of restraint ever broadcast on live television. He didn't just defend his honor, he redefined what it meant to be strong. Think about this for a moment. How many people could have walked into that situation, with the entire deck stacked against them, and walked out without saying a word louder than necessary, without losing control, without breaking? That's not just martial arts. That's not just self-control. That's mastery. And it left the world in awe. For days, the showdown dominated headlines. Pundits debated who came out on top, but deep down everyone knew. The host had tried to tear a man down with insults and cheap shots, but Chuck had built himself higher with dignity and discipline. And audiences connected with that. In a world hungry for drama, Chuck had given them something better, a lesson. When you really think about it, what we witnessed wasn't just a clash between a celebrity and a host. It was a reminder, one that struck home with millions, that true strength doesn't roar, it whispers. True power doesn't lash out, it holds back. And sometimes, the greatest victory is walking away with your honor intact. The moment became more than just viral content. It became part of the legend of Chuck Norris, a man already larger than life, now proving once again why his name carries the weight it does. Not because of the jokes, not because of the memes, but because when the spotlight burned brightest and the provocation was strongest, he showed the world exactly who he was: calm, composed, and unbreakable. And that's the story of the most explosive television showdown you'll ever see. Not because fists flew, but because they didn't. Not because of chaos, but because of control. And if there's one thing you take away from this incredible moment, let it be this: sometimes the loudest statement is made in silence. So, what do you think? Did Chuck Norris handle that moment the only way a true martial artist could? Or do you think the host got exactly what he deserved when his plan backfired so spectacularly? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, because this is one showdown people will be talking about for years to come. And if you've enjoyed reliving this unforgettable clash with me, make sure to hit that like button, share this with a friend, and subscribe for more stories just like this one. Because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.